wake up. Well, I know I'm gonna be the man who wakes up next to you. When I go out, yeah, I know I'm gonna be the man who goes along with you. If I get drunk.
What's up, everybody? Welcome back to the Sooner Nation podcast. Glad to have you tuning in. I know I'm a day late. I know it. It's not because I'm pouting, as some of you have suspected. It's not that. Just technical difficulties. Could not record on Sunday. But that's good news for you, because that means instead of having Sunday, Tuesday podcast this week, you get Monday, Tuesday, and then Thursday. So we're back on track. Nothing to do with Oklahoma losing 34-26 to Ole Miss on Saturday. That's going to be a tough one for us to unpack, because there's no sugarcoating it. This was a game that Oklahoma could have, and honestly probably should have won. The Sooners had their opportunities all afternoon. But we also saw them do all afternoon was fail to capitalize. They were right there. They were right there in striking distance, but then you got a handful of self-inflicted mistakes, and that ends up being the main difference in this game. So what I want to do, look, we're Monday, so you had the Saturday afternoon, Saturday evening, everyone digesting and breaking this game down. And so then you had Sunday, same thing. So I don't want to necessarily just recap the loss, because it has been recapped to the max. What I want to do is I want to zoom in on just some of the key moments, like, the missed third downs, the illegal formation that led to the safety, the explosive plays that allowed Ole Miss to make their big moments. And then obviously that huge punt, fumble by Sategna. So let's ask the bigger question here. We know the outcome of the game. We know Tennessee's up next. We know everything. So let's look at the bigger question here. Why do these same types of breakdowns keep happening with Oklahoma? Because that's where your real story lies here, okay? Let's start with the third downs, because I think this stat is one of the most telling things of the afternoon. Sooners went 4-14 on third down. That's just not good enough. It's absolutely not good enough, especially when you're playing at home, especially when it's a conference game where possessions are at a premium. Now, the Rebels weren't spectacular themselves. They were 9 of 21, but still, that's a massive swing of control in the game. And it's not that Oklahoma wasn't converting. It was when they weren't converting. It felt like it was the most critical times. You've got third and manageable situations where Oklahoma just couldn't get lined up. They couldn't protect, the quarterback long enough, and they just simply missed open receivers. Those are critical mistakes. And you look at, I think one of the biggest killers on the afternoon was just bad execution on short yardage plays. And that's been a recurring issue. It wasn't just Saturday against Ole Miss. We've seen that throughout the season. Oklahoma's, particularly the interior offensive line, has not consistently won the battles that they need to win. And when you're looking at a fast and physical front like what Ole Miss has, that's a weakness that shows up again and again in terms of Oklahoma. And if you think back, something that we've talked about it at nauseum here. Brent Venables' comments earlier in the year when he talked about owning situational football, winning on third down, winning in the red zone, and the turnover margin. On Saturday, Oklahoma lost all three of those categories. They lost them all. And it's not that they didn't move the ball. They had almost 360 yards of offense. But the inability to finish drives, that turned what could have been touchdowns into field goals. And against a team like Ole Miss, that's a recipe for frustration. And we felt it across the Sooner Nation on Saturday. And let's talk about moments that flip the momentum of this game, right? Because you've got the illegal formation that leads to a safety in the second quarter, an absolute gut punch. But even before the illegal formation, you've got a penalty on the punt return. And so you've got a 10-10 ball game. Oklahoma backed up deep, and that mistake, that turned what was a tie ball game with Oklahoma having the opportunity to gain more momentum. It turned a 2-point swing where Ole Miss get the safety, they get the ball, they get a field goal, but more importantly, they get momentum. And it wasn't just the points. It was the field position. It was the lost rhythm. It was the sense that Oklahoma blinked first in a high-pressure situation. And then you go to that fourth quarter punt return that was fumbled by Sategna. That was a moment where I think the majority of us, the majority of Sooner Nation, and even some guys wearing uniforms on the sidelines, they felt the life drain out. The stadium was silent. The sideline was silent. And Oklahoma had just forced a stop. They were about to get the ball back. It's what we saw. That we saw those drives against Michigan. We saw the drive against Auburn. Those fourth quarter just chunk drives that eat the clock and give you the winning score. That's what was about to happen. And then it literally slips away from them. And those are the moments that define games within this conference. It's not always about who racks up the most yards. It's not about who plays clean. It's really, I guess it is about who plays clean. It's about who makes the fewest mistakes, who executes when the moment gets loud. And Brent Venables, we know it. We know he's preached discipline since day one. But this game showed that Oklahoma is still learning what that really looks like for 4 full quarters of football. And even on the defensive side of the ball, because this unit has been outstanding this season, one of the best in the country statistically. But the Rebels exposed some cracks there. Ole Miss hit multiple downfield shots on the Sooners. There were some back-breaking throws that flipped field position. Sooners give up 315 yards through the air. And several of those completions came on busted coverages or miscommunications in the zone. And then you got the ground game where the Ole Miss didn't really gash Oklahoma consistently, but they did pick their spots. A few missed tackles here and there, you turn a 3-yard gain into a 15-yard chunk. And that's what elite offenses like what Lane Kiffin runs at Ole Miss, that's what they do. They make you pay for even the smallest of mistakes. And that's not to say the defense played poorly overall. They still made key stops, especially in the red zone. But when you got games like this, 1 or 2 coverage busts, again, there's your difference. There's your difference between a win and a loss. So where does Oklahoma go from here? I'm not one that's going to subscribe that this loss is catastrophic. I don't think it is. I think this loss is a reminder. It's a reminder that the margin for error in this conference is razor thin. You cannot afford misalignments. You cannot afford unforced penalties. You can't afford mental lapses in big moments. And I think Brent Venables has done a great job rebuilding the culture here. There's no doubt about that. The defense has taken massive strides since when he arrived 4 years ago. And the physicality of this team all around is night and day from 2 years ago. But now the next stop is learning how to close games. There's a reason why Ole Miss is a top 10 program. They're experienced, they're well coached, they don't flinch. And for Oklahoma, this game felt, to me, it looked like it felt like a lesson in learning how to handle success and pressure simultaneously. It's not about talent. OU has talent. They have plenty of talent. It's about poise. And at the end of the day, this one hurts because it was there for the taking. It's not like the loss in the Cotton Bowl to Texas. Oklahoma was not outplayed for 60 minutes in this game. They just lost the key moments. And I think if you're looking for a glass half full type perspective on this, if you're looking for some good news, is that those moments are fixable. You clean up procedural penalties, you execute better on third down, and for Pete's sake, take care of the football. I've been screaming that all season long. You do that. If the Sooners can learn from this loss instead of letting it define them, they're going to be right back in the mix. You still got a gauntlet ahead of you. This is just one game down. Because I think the bones of a really good football team are here. They just have to learn to finish the job. So let me take a break here. If you enjoy the Sooner Nation podcast, please make sure to subscribe, share it with Oklahoma fans that you know. Let me know what you think. Hit us up on Instagram. Hit us up on Facebook, heartland-sports.com. Every podcast episode has its own post there. Let me know what your thoughts are on the episode. Let me know if you got any questions. Is this a wake-up call for Oklahoma? Is this a bump on the road? Or is this it all doom and gloom moving forward? This is the Sooner Nation podcast. We'll be right back. So if you're like me, you're probably still replaying certain moments from Oklahoma's loss to Ole Miss last Saturday. It's just kind of going over in your head. It was one of those games that just kind of leaves you frustrated. Again, not because you got dominated, but because, man, they just had their chances. And like I said, I'm recording on Monday instead of Sunday, so there's been 2 days of regurgitation of the same thoughts from all the platforms out there. So instead of spending our entire episode here reliving the mistakes or what went wrong, how about this? How about we do something a little bit different, and we take a look and talk about maybe some of the things that went right, because you can lose a football game and still say, well, this worked well, right? Because, for all the frustration that we have from Saturday, there were flashes of real potential in this game. There were moments where you could see what Oklahoma could become if they put all the pieces together, right? So we can call this segment something like flashes of potential, what the Sooners did well in their loss against Ole Miss, if we're writing headlines. And I think by the end, I think maybe I'll get you to agree with me that there is a lot more to build on here than it might feel like coming off of this loss. Let's start with the guy who, in my opinion, was the biggest bright spot of the entire afternoon. Xavier Robinson was just a star, all right? You got a sophomore running back. I think he was fantastic. Over 100 yards rushing. You got the 2 touchdowns. They had that explosive 65-yard burst that brought the crowd back to life. And it just showed how dynamic he can be when he's given room to operate. And the thing with Robinson on Saturday, it wasn't just one play. It was the way he ran the ball. He was decisive. He was physical. He was confident. And you could see, as he had time there in the game, you could see the trust building between him and the offensive line. I mean, Oklahoma's front clearly has not been perfect this season, but this game, especially in the second and third quarters, they started to get some movement. Robinson was able to read blocks well. He was able to stay patient, and then he hit the hole, and he hit it with violence. And that's what you want from a feature back. And I think Oklahoma fans can confidently move forward through these last 4 games of the season, knowing you've got two backs in Blaylock and Robinson that are more than just serviceable. And I think Blaylock had his moment against South Carolina, Robinson against Ole Miss, and I think what stood out to me with Robinson was his finish, the way he finished the runs. I mean, even when he wasn't breaking free, he was falling forward. And that's a culture thing. That's toughness showing through opportunity. And if Oklahoma can continue to get this type of production from the running back room, and you pair that with Blaylock, you pair it with an improved consistency from the offensive line, it opens up everything else within this offense. And you could feel it. When Robinson got rolling, the entire sideline came alive. The stadium came back alive. And that's what a guy who is a tone setter does for you. I think you look at Isaiah Sategna, and the vertical threat that's there. That's a 76-yard touchdown reception in the second quarter. That was one of the biggest plays of the day, probably the biggest play of the day for Oklahoma. And I think it reminds us as Sooner Nation that the offense, it does have explosive potential. It's there. It was a perfectly timed play. You had great protection. You had great ball placement by Mateer, and Sategna beat his guy out. I mean, he just beat his man, and then he outran the Ole Miss defense to the end zone. And I think that play tells us something bigger. Like when the offense stays on schedule and when they give John Mateer time, they can stretch defenses vertically. And that's when they're at their most dangerous. You could tell that Ben Arbuckle wanted to keep building the deep shot. He wanted that element in the offense because those plays create instant momentum, but they also prevent defenses from just loading the box to stop the run. So, yeah, I mean, look, I know what you're saying. I know what you're thinking. I know what you're screaming at me. Sategna had that tough fumble in the fourth quarter on the punt return. I get it. That was a heartbreaker. That was a momentum killer. We talked about it in the opening segment. But if you zoom out, you've got a guy here that's showing signs of being a game changer. You've got the speed, you've got the confidence, you've got the route running. It's all there with this dude. And so, yeah, he made a mistake on an effort play that was costly, but doesn't erase everything he did. Especially when you look at like this year when Oklahoma's wide receiver room and that rotation, it still kind of started to take shape. Seeing Sategna step into that, quote, spark plug role, that's a huge positive moving forward for this program. Again, let's look over at the defensive side of the ball because I think there's a story here that's getting overshadowed. Oklahoma gave up 22 points in the first half, unacceptable. But then you look at the third quarter where the Sooner defense held Ole Miss to just 3 points. Now think about that. Against one of the SEC's most explosive offenses, the Sooners, they tightened up. They actually got stops when they needed to. And that's not for nothing. But you clearly had adjustments that were made. Brent Venables dialed back some of the pressure looks, and he forced Ole Miss to try to sustain longer drives. Tackling got better, especially in space. And you got guys like Robert Spears-Jennings and Kip Lewis flying around. Those two guys led the team in tackles. And you could tell the front seven seemed to take it personally about getting gashed early, right? They were more disciplined with their gap fits. They communicated better. It's that kind of in-game adjustment, that mental toughness to bounce back. That's exactly what Venables, again, that's what he's been preaching since he got here 4 years ago. So, yeah, I'm not going to excuse, I'm not going to escape, I'm not going to dance around the fact that they still gave up too many explosive plays. But I'm looking at the response after halftime. That was real. This was not a defense that quit. This was not a team that quit. This is a defense that regrouped, they battled, and they gave the offense a chance to take the lead, which ultimately they did. I mean, it was briefly, but they did at 26-25. I look at that even in a loss, and I see that this was a show of progress. And you look at the culture here, you look at the growth, you look at what's repeatable, right? So here's what I'm saying. Like you've got these three things, these three flashes that tell us kind of where Oklahoma's heading. Like for example, I think it shows that the talent is there, right? I think this when you look at the running backs, you look at the explosiveness at receiver, you look at the defense still growing. What you see is that the pieces on both sides of the ball, they're good enough to win big games. You've got the pieces in place that you need. But it also shows that something even more encouraging, I think, is that these flashes should become more consistent because they're learning. Last year, Oklahoma struggled to find rhythm. They struggled to respond after adversity. But this time, even falling behind, the most they've trailed all season, they fought back. They didn't fold. They continued to make plays. So the next step, and honestly, it's a big one, the next step is sustaining those flashes for 4 quarters. That's going to result in, and it's going to mean cleaner execution on third down. It's going to mean not wasting explosive plays with penalties or special teams miscues. It means finishing the drive after a big gain instead of settling for a field goal. And if Oklahoma can learn to bottle up those, quote, good moments, then what you see is like the confidence of the running back room, with the explosiveness and the threat of Isaiah Sategna, that the defensive composure, those are going to be a problem for other teams down the stretch if Oklahoma can use this for their advantage. And that's what elite teams do. They don't flash, they stack. And I think Oklahoma's closer to that than what people might realize. So, yeah, I mean, the loss hurts. I'm not trying to sugarcoat that. But I think it's also not the end of the story, and I don't think it's the end of the world here. This team showed heart. They showed fight. They showed that the ceiling is still high, maybe higher than we thought it was going to be a few weeks ago when they lost to Texas even. And I think if you're with us here in Sooner Nation, the worst thing we could do is lose sight of that. Because even in defeat, I think you can see the pieces of something really special coming together. And keep in mind where we had hoped this team would be was somewhere in that range of 7 to 9 wins. We got caught up in 6-1. We got caught up in being in the top 10. We got caught up in the pursuit for the playoff. But now we're a little bit back to reset, a little bit back to reality. And we're 7 to 9 wins. And then you go to the bowl game and get that 10th win. This is improvement. This is what we asked for, and this is what we're seeing. Sure, it's not where we want to settle, but it means that this program is moving forward from the ashes that it was in 2024. But you've got to turn these flashes into identity for that to happen. But if they can, I mean, look, I think they're ready to continue making noise within this conference. So last Thursday, I used the word identity a lot when I was previewing this game with Ole Miss. And I want to turn that into this final segment and just kind of have, let's use this as therapy, okay? Let's have a real honest conversation, not just about a loss, but about what the loss means. This was a home loss to Ole Miss. Obviously, that's the Captain Obvious statement of the year, right? But it was the kind of game that just, we've been talking about it here. It just kind of leaves you with a pit in your stomach because the Sooners were right there. This was a game that was winnable. It was within reach. And yet, Oklahoma, they just couldn't finish. And you can break down the missed third downs. You can talk about the illegal formation that led to a safety, the punt-return fumble. Those are big moments, and we've talked about those things already. But now I want to zoom out a little bit because this wasn't just about one football game for Oklahoma. This was about who Oklahoma is becoming in the SEC. And I think that's the lens I want to use for this final segment and have just kind of a identity check moment. Are the Sooners who they think they are under Brent Venables, or are they still in the process of becoming that team? And what they want, what Brent Venables wants, is a defense-first, disciplined, physical program that can go toe-to-toe with the best that this conference has to offer. Well, we know they're defense first. We know they're physical. I don't think you can describe this team as disciplined just yet. And that's one of the many, I think, real answers that came from what happened in Norman on Saturday. Oklahoma, let's start here. Oklahoma is good enough to compete in the SEC. Now, that's clear. That's undebatable. That we're not recapping a blowout loss. It wasn't one of those games where you look up and say, yeah, we're outmatched physically. Oklahoma had Ole Miss on the ropes. They were good enough to compete, but that's not always the same as good enough to win and win consistently, especially when we're talking about top 10 programs. And what we saw on Saturday is the reason why. We saw the reason why Oklahoma is kind of working as a, quote, up-and-comer And Ole Miss is a staple top 10 program with a shot to win the conference championship. And it comes down to this. Ole Miss made situational plays. They won that hidden yardage battle. They stayed composed, even when the crowd was going crazy. And like I said in the opening segment, Oklahoma blinked first. I think you go back to that illegal formation penalty that results in the safety. That was it. That was your tell. That was the tone setter. Because that's a play that's not about talent. That's a play that's about discipline. The penalty on the punt return, the penalty on the illegal formation. Man, that's about the guys who line up. We want to blame coaches. We want to blame coaches for everything. But that type of penalty, that's for the 11 guys on the field. The punt return in the fourth quarter, that's not a play that's about athleticism. We know Isaiah Sategna has athleticism, but that is about execution under pressure. And look, the coaches have their own reasons that we want to criticize them. There are legitimate reasons to criticize. But these two examples, nope. Those are not on the coaches. Those are on the guys on the field. Those are identity plays. Those are the type of things that separate the contenders from the teams who are still trying to figure out who they are. And under Brent Venables, Oklahoma's identity has been about defense. It has been about culture, and it's been about toughness. And you can see that foundation taking root. The defense cannot deny its improvement. That mentality has changed. But what Saturday showed is that Oklahoma is still in the middle of that transformation. They're not fully that team yet. They're not all the way there. And I mean, honestly, that's okay. Because I think what we're watching in 2025 is not failure. I honestly think we're watching growth. And when you look at this defense, that's where you see Brent Venables' fingerprints all over the program. When we're going into that weekend against Ole Miss, Oklahoma led the nation in total defense. They ranked second in scoring defense. They were the number one sack-producing defense in the country. That's not a fluke. That's not smoke and mirrors. But they faced a quarterback in Ole Miss with Trinidad Chambliss who just made them look human. He made them look normal. 315 yards through the air, 53 on the ground, and most of it came off of broken plays, scrambles or busted coverages. And here's the thing, that's not a sign of bad defense necessarily. It may be the sign of inexperience, maybe the sign of youth. Oklahoma's front held up well at times. Their tackling improved as the game went on, but look, when Chambliss got loose, the back end struggled. There were struggles to contain these kind of like second reaction plays. And I think in a way, Brent Venables addressed that after the game. He said about Chambliss, he's a winner. That's what he's done against everybody. But we needed to play better to have a chance to win. And he says this, I didn't have them ready to do that. So there's a coach owning it. I believe that's true leadership. But I think also what it shows is that this defense is still learning what it means to finish drives, to get off the field when the opportunity is there. Now, if you're looking for the encouragement part of Saturday, it's that they didn't fold. They only allowed 3 points in the third quarter. We talked about that. That's the fight that you want to see. And the next step is going to be turning those moments of toughness into 60 minutes of dominance. And when they do, this is going to look like a classic Brent Venables defense, the kind that's going to break the will of their opponents. So I think you're light years ahead of the game on defense. But if we're going to be honest with each other, because we're having an honest talk here on this final segment, the bigger question right now is probably on the offense. I mean, it's what's happening on that side of the ball. Let me ask you this question. What is Oklahoma's offensive identity? I mean, we saw flashes, right? We saw the 76-yard touchdown to Sategna. We saw the 65-yard run by Robinson. Those are big-time, game-breaking plays, but in between them, there was a bang load of inconsistency. Oklahoma ran 60 other plays outside of those two big ones, and they averaged just under 4 yards per snap. That is not sustainable within this conference. And part of that, well, again, we want to blame Arbuckle. And again, I'm not giving the coaches a pass. I think 2 times this year we've seen Arbuckle outcoached, and both of those times ended in losses. But another part of that has to be, you got to look at the execution. You've got to look at the rhythm. And then you got to look at this, like, I believe maybe like a philosophical tug of war, if you will. Because what Brent Venables wants is a physical, balanced offense that complements his defense, right? So we're talking about an offense that can grind out first downs, that can chew up clock and control the tempo. But the DNA of Oklahoma, the DNA of this football program, the identity that fans are used to, it's always been about explosiveness. So right now, it feels like they're trying to bridge two worlds together. You've got the high-octane old Big 12 version of Oklahoma and the power football SEC version that Brent Venables envisions. And you're trying to mesh them together to create something. Now, in my opinion, neither of these is wrong. But when you're trying to find balance, it makes it more difficult, because that's the key. Balance is going to be your key. And you've got an offensive coordinator who's calling games at the highest level of his career for the very first time. You've got a quarterback who's playing games at the highest level of his career for the very first time. And I know Mateer wasn't perfect, but, I mean, he showed flashes. 223 yards, the touchdown to Sategna. He kept the offense moving in spurts. But, man, he missed some key throws. And he took some sacks that I don't believe you can take in tight games. But there it is. There is part of the growing pains. And that's why this offensive identity is still a work in progress. And if you want to know where the difference was between these two teams, it wasn't in the box score. I believe truly it was in the margins. Ole Miss, they didn't play perfect football. They had their own mistakes. But when it came to situational execution, they won. They won the critical downs. We talked about Oklahoma. They were 4 of 14 on third down, 1 of 3 on fourth down. Man, that's brutal. That is just brutal in a close game. They gave up the safety. They committed 8 penalties. And once again, they lost the turnover battle. Those are everything that you can do in order to lose a football game, Oklahoma did. Everything you can do in order to win a football game, they didn't do all of that. But they definitely checked all the boxes of things you have to do in order to lose. And then you add to that the special teams, that late fumble by Sategna, that just flipped everything. And you just feel the air go out of that stadium. It's those little moments, those 5 or 6 plays that decide every SEC game, not just Oklahoma, Ole Miss, every single game. They define whether you're an elite team or you're an almost there team. And right now, Oklahoma's still learning how to win those moments. I think this is part of life in the SEC. You can't just be talented. You can't just rely on speed or scheming. Look, everybody's got athletes. Everybody's got coaches. And what separates the good from the great here is going to be discipline, consistency, and execution. Ole Miss showed that. They didn't panic when Oklahoma surged for the lead in the third quarter. They stayed composed. And then they ended up being the ones to make the big throw, to make the big kick. They finished the game. What I'm saying is that's what Oklahoma has to learn. That's exactly what Venables is trying to build. This game, I don't think it wasn't a sign that Oklahoma does not belong in the SEC. I think it was a reminder that they're becoming an SEC team. That process, it's not instant. It's not about flipping a switch. It's about building an identity that holds up under pressure. And Saturday, it was a stress test. So where does that leave Oklahoma? You sit at 6-2 on the season, 2-2 in the conference, still in the mix. You're still in the thick of things. But now you have a better, more clear understanding of what it takes to finish games like this. And I thought Brent Venables, I thought he summed it up perfectly. He said it hurt for our guys. They fought their butts off. They showed great toughness and resolve. They had a chance on a day where we didn't coach them good enough and we didn't play good enough situationally. We still have a chance with the ball to go down and tie the game against a really good football team. That's it. That's exactly it. They're right there. This is a defense-first culture, and it's taking root. The offense is finding its rhythm, finding its voice. The pieces are coming together. I don't look at this as a step back. I look at it as a reality check. And probably a very necessary reality check if we're going to continue to be honest. So if Oklahoma uses this loss the right way, it could become the moment they stop trying to look like an SEC team and really started to play like one. So, hey, once more, if you enjoy the podcast, please make sure to subscribe, leave us a rating, share with other Oklahoma fans. We're all trying to make sense of this one, and we got more to digest this week online, heartland-sports.com. Start moving our attention towards SEC power rankings and the Tennessee Volunteers as their game approaches on Saturday. Until we're back, have a great week. Stay grounded, as always. Boomer Sooner.